Welcome to episode 15 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined in virtual studio by the man who could go professional in social distancing, the one, the only, John Sloat.
We know that's not true. We know that's true of our friend Nate in Ohio.
Yes, indeed. Yes, he would be. Well, he'd be an elite social distancer. I still think you're professional quality.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm not in his league though. And
Well,
I just want to admit that at the top of the podcast here.
No one is. So how's the quarantine life treating you?
It's good. It's good. Yeah, Andrea and I are doing a lot of cooking and keeping the house clean. And if we had a yard to work on right now, we would. Our yard is just a big dirt pile right now, so we're waiting on grass to be planted by our builder. So, but yeah, just trying to stay busy, trying to do workout videos in the afternoon, and trying to cook dinner and clean and stay sane.
So you're probably a P90X guy, a Beachbody guy. What kind of workouts we talking here?
No, Brent Mencarelli, who's Grace's chaplain, turned me on to this mostly free online YouTuber that does workout videos. Fitness Blender is the website. It's pretty good. Do a high interval training.
Working towards the six pack for the wedding. Is that what we're working towards here? The six pack of abs.
I think we're just working for not having diabetes is sort of the goal.
Okay.
Is a bit of the goal at this point. So
gotcha.
How's quarantine in the Harmon home with a few more people?
Yeah. So I don't know that much has changed since our last episode, other than the nicer weather definitely makes a big difference in the sort of morale in the Harmon household.
Yeah.
I've been trying to run more consistently, but and also playing basketball with the boys in the driveway has been good. So yeah, it's I feel like we're kind of like in Groundhog Day, right? Every day feels pretty much more or less the same.
Every day is the same. Yeah. Well, how's teaching classes online going for you? How's that experience been?
Yeah, so I've got it pretty easy in terms of I've got one class, and I had almost all of the lecture material previously recorded for our Deploy program.
Okay.
And so really, I haven't had to record any lectures. I've been meeting once a week with my Greek exegesis students. So, heavier load on the email in terms of answering questions and that kind of stuff and interacting with students. But I by far have it much easier than most of my colleagues, including you, since you have one class, but you have
46.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was 47, and I was very frustrated that one person wasn't responding to anything. And then I learned that they are a Silver Scholar, which is
yeah,
which is our retired population coming in to take classes at Grace. And I don't think I think the Silver Scholar just sort of threw their hands up and said, "I'm not going to worry about this."
Yeah.
So that was so we're down to 46, but yeah, it's been good. I do live lectures 3 times a week. And then do online quizzes and those sorts of things. So it's been good. A lot of emails to respond to for it. I think the hardest part has been that I have just a small group of students, just a very small group of students that just aren't responding to anything that I send them. And so that's been frustrating because I want to be understanding, but also feel like a jerk that I'm like putting burden on them in the midst of, quarantine and all these things. So yeah,
sure.
there's a mixture of feelings there.
Gotcha. Well, we certainly want to encourage our listeners to connect with us, whether it's through social media. You can find us on Twitter at V&S Pod. And you can always email the show various and sundry podcast at gmail.com. We would love for you, if you're enjoying the show, to leave us a 5-star rating. And even if you
5-star.
5 stars only, yes. And if you want to go above and beyond the call of duty, leaving us a glowing short review would be greatly appreciated. I don't know if I haven't checked lately if we've had any additional reviews. But I did
Do
want to
some
note
research. Yeah.
that we did pick up a listener in a new country this past week.
Is that the Philippines listener?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, that was exciting. I have no clue.
No
Just
idea.
no idea.
No idea. So yeah, I mean we're slowly inching our way across this great planet of ours. So um, when it comes to our sort of sports segment for today's episode, last week we mentioned that the NBA was sponsoring a horse competition. Again, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's a game that kids have played for centuries, it feels like, probably.
Yeah.
But you play it in the driveway, one person takes a shot, and if you make it, the next person has to make that exact same shot in the exact same way, or you get a letter, and then once you spell out horse, you're done, you lose. So the NBA is trying to uh, do something along these lines, and they had 8 players competing in this. Did you watch any of this?
I did not. I've seen some video clips, and I've heard some commentary on it, but I did not watch. Did you watch?
I did. I did not know that it was starting on Sunday night on Easter evening until you and I both received a text from Nate in Ohio commenting about a certain feature of the competition. So,
Yeah.
but I think the biggest surprise seems to have been that WNBA player Allie Quigley took out Chris Paul.
Yeah, and where does she play? Like what team? What
I
team?
think she plays. I think she plays in Chicago.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the WNBA. I
I'm
just
not
don't
either.
follow it.
I'm not either.
She apparently outshot Chris Paul, huh?
Yeah, she's apparently won a couple of 3-point competitions in the WNBA, so a sharpshooter. But okay, here's part of the deal. Here's one of my surprising observations. Of the 8 players who participated in this, and this includes former players like Chauncey Billups and Paul Pierce as well, only one of them had their own personal indoor home gym. Everyone else is playing outside.
Yeah, yeah. Although I will say, from the video footage I saw, Chauncey Billups was on his estate. It seemed, and it was
Sure.
It seemed quite beautiful.
And the same for Zach LaVine. I mean,
Yeah.
he at one point they had him walk around his property where he's showing like, well, here's my batting cages, and here's like, I mean, he has this palatial, whole grounds that he's walking around. But it just surprised me that Mike Conley's the only guy with an indoor gym. So he had a huge advantage, I think, playing indoors, controlled environment compared to guys playing outside and in the wind. And
Yeah, yeah. It would seem to increase the number of factors you got to consider when taking a shot. Where is Mike Conley located? Like any idea where his house is? I mean, because he's from Indiana. He's from here in Indiana, right? So
yeah, he's an Indianapolis guy. I don't remember seeing where his home is. He played for years in Memphis before just this past year playing in Utah now. I can't imagine that he was in Utah because
right.
it's his first year there. I can't imagine that he just bought a house that happened to have a really nice indoor gym. It just doesn't.
That's a
seem like
dream on the wall, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So another surprising element of this was the fact that your guy that
I
you
know.
picked lost.
It was. I felt Trae Young was a sneaky pick and was a good pick. He was good enough to at least be included, right?
Yeah.
But he lost pretty quickly, so that was sad.
He had an early lead over Chauncey Billups, and then
Yeah,
just started missing shots left and right.
But what was Chauncey's nickname when he was in the NBA?
Wasn't it Mr. Big Shot?
Mr. Big Shot. So of course, Mr. Big Shot's going to come through.
Yeah, but again, Trae Young's playing outside, and some of these guys, like, they're playing in their driveway, which, okay, that's, respectable. But I'm stunned. Some of these guys are playing on, like, hoops that look like they just went to Walmart, like,
Yeah, I
2
did
days
see that.
ago. And they put it together in like 3 hours, and it's got like the sandbag holding down the the base of the rim or of the hoop. And now some of those guys obviously have really nice hoops and that sort of stuff, but it's just kind
Yeah,
of surprising. But
from the photos I saw, it looked like Trae Young was in like his parents' driveway almost. Like it almost
yes,
looked. Now I think that's his house, right? But it looked like
I think so.
he's like, hey, I'm gonna crash at mom and dad's, in their subdivision and do this.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms I've heard about it is that the video quality was not very good.
Yeah, very poor. But obviously, if you're honoring the sort of the quarantine kind of thing, you're essentially relying on Wi-Fi because these guys are
Yeah.
playing outside, and so you got variations in quality of Wi-Fi of the people recording what each of these athletes are doing. So you know it's yeah, the video quality was a bit low.
Hmm. And so where does it go from here? What's the
I think it's the semifinals are next on Thursday, if I remember correctly. Mike Conley takes on Chauncey Billups, and then the Allie Quigley, the WNBA sharpshooter,
hmm,
plays Zach LaVine.
Chicago versus Chicago there, huh?
Yes. Now, interestingly, thankfully for Allie Quigley here, no dunking is allowed in the in this.
Yeah, otherwise that's all Zach would do.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, one other thing before we move on, Trae Young apparently, like a couple days before the competition, was so bored in quarantine that he posted his real cell number on social media. And then he doubled down on that during the competition, and they posted it again. And he basically said, yeah, go ahead and hit me up. Text me. I can't fathom doing that.
Hold on, I'm looking it up right now. I'm looking for his cell phone number.
Yeah, I mean, can you fathom
Yeah.
being an NBA player and putting out your real cell number and encouraging people just to hit you up to text you? I mean, how many
What's fun?
texts do you think he's getting out of that?
It's got to be thousands. I mean, the NBA is super, super popular, right? He's got to be getting a ton of texts.
Yeah.
Oh, are you ready for his number? Are we
Yeah,
ready to announce
we
this?
can. Yeah, we can give it out. I mean, he's clearly not shy about it. So
Yeah, Trae Young's number 404-737-4344. Go ahead, text Trae Young, see what's going on, see if he responds, see if his phone explodes.
yeah, tell him you heard his cell number on the Various and Sundry podcast, and we'll have to see if we can get a shout out. So
yeah, again, that number is 404-737-4344.
yes, indeed.
What sort of text? What would you send Trae Young? What do you think people are texting him?
Well, I was trying to encourage my youngest son to text him. He's like, I don't even know what to text him about. I suggested, why are you missing so many makeable shots in horse? I mean, why don't you have a better situation there in terms of an indoor gym or a better hoop in the driveway? I mean, I don't know. You could throw shade at him. He
Yeah.
seems like a pretty, level-headed, down-to-earth kind of person, as best you can tell from, what you can see on the outside. So
Yeah. I don't know what I'd text Trae. I'd probably ask him, "Hey, come to Grace. Come hang out."
John Sloat always recruiting for the
Yeah. I'd love to see him on campus. I mean, he's about the right age, right?
yeah.
He'd be going into his senior year this year. So fourth year senior. I mean, he could come play with the team.
Sure.
I don't know. I think it'd be fun.
Or at least I'm sure he wouldn't be eligible to play on the actual varsity team here, but
Yeah, he could scrimmage,
unleash
though.
him,
Yeah.
unleash him on the intramural scene, and that would be a fun watch.
Oh yeah.
So, anything else on the on the NBA horse competition before we move on to our main topic today?
I don't think so. Anything else going on in sports we need to break down?
NFL draft coming up soon.
NFL draft
Like
coming up.
we're recording on April 14th, so I think that's the 23rd. I think it starts, and they're
It's
doing it
usually in
virtually.
the 23rd to 27th is
Yeah,
usually.
I think I heard that that Roger Goodell is going to do his part, play his role from his basement in his home. And I saw someone comment this will be the first NFL draft that he's not hearing boos.
Yeah, I was about to say, is his family going to gather and boo him to make it feel more like an NFL draft?
It would be nice. Yeah, I think they should do that. So
I've heard that some teams are upset that Jerry Jones and his son will be in the same room and have an advantage over other teams because they can't be in the same war room. And I've heard some commentators go, since when is it an advantage that Jerry Jones and his son are in the same room?
yeah, exactly. So, well, our main topic for today, and I think even before COVID-19 took place, I think at some points we had maybe mentioned this as a possible topic to talk about, and it seems especially relevant now in terms of our forced quarantine.
Yeah.
And that's simply the topic of community. And why is it so important? We'll get into a whole variety of different angles on this subject of community, but let's maybe start with why is it so fundamental to the nature of Christianity? Why is it that and maybe even if we want to branch out, why is it at some level fundamental to our nature as human beings to want to have some measure of community? Obviously that differs by wiring and personality and that sort of thing, but
Sure. Even though I've seen even doctors come out and maybe psychologists more come out and say even the most extreme introvert needs people. Like even the most even the most extreme introvert needs to have people around them, even in a time of quarantine. And I don't know if you're asking the question, why do we need community? I'm not sure I have phenomenal answers for that, but I do know it's a basic human need and desire going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right?
yeah.
Where Adam is in the garden walking around and looking for suitable helper, and there's none, and so the Lord makes him one. The Lord says this is not good, that he is alone. And so we learn from God himself in that moment that loneliness and being on one's own is not a good thing, and we need others to multiply joy, to fill and subdue. We need other people around us. That's what I naturally think of. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think that those are all things I would echo, and in terms of when you look at Genesis, there's absolutely, I think sometimes when people read Genesis 1 and 2, they read that as primarily, even when God says it's not good for man to be alone, I think they stop at the piece of like, oh well, that refers to marriage. And
Right.
obviously it of course refers to marriage, but I think it goes far beyond that in terms of how God has wired us, how God has made us, that he didn't make us to live as isolated individuals. That even when you look at the original commission that God gives in terms of be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, that requires more than one person. And even the purpose of it is to multiply the number of people. And the idea is obviously not that they would live these sort of completely isolated individual lives, but that together they would reflect God's image and do the sort of building of creation, the exercising of dominion that God envisioned in that commission, such that from the very beginning, God has intended human beings to live in community with each other.
And when we see the fall, when the fall takes place, right? I mean, just a chapter later there in Genesis, we regularly see them hiding from God. We often think about that there is a break between man and God, right? And that's certainly central in the biblical narrative.
Yep.
But there's also a hiding of from one another. There's a covering. There's a lack of vulnerability that happens between
Yeah,
husband and wife in that moment.
absolutely. And it, even even in that context, you see immediately a sense of not just of shame, but of
Yeah.
blame shifting. Both Adam and Eve are blaming someone else. So it's um, Adam blames his wife and really blames God indirectly when you read the text, because he says the wife that you gave to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the woman, of course, blames the serpent, and so lots of blame shifting there. But even when you look at the consequences of the fall, that a central piece of that is, in fact, that relationships between human beings becomes infinitely more complicated and
Hmm.
is affected at the most fundamental levels by sin and selfishness and such. So
And I think we see that the ideas of community develop, and that it's still a need, even after Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, right? So we see Paul constantly talking about one another passages, right? That the church is supposed to do things together. We're to care for one another. We're supposed to bear one another's burdens. We're to do a number of things together.
yeah, and even in the book of Acts, um, after Pentecost, right? And the Spirit's poured out, and you have this massive spiritual awakening. Thousands are converted. Right after that event, Luke goes out of his way in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47, to describe what the community life was like among these early believers. And that seems to be a pretty significant emphasis even in the rest of the book of Acts, that uh, God is not just saving individuals, as central as individual salvation is. He's saving people into a body of people, into a group of people. That the idea of a sort of completely isolated individual Christian is not really something that the New Testament envisions. Now, obviously, there can be exceptions, right? So you've got the person who is living in a closed country and happens to stumble upon a Bible and is converted, and they don't know another Christian. Well, of
Sure.
course, those things happen, but that's not the norm, and that's not the sort of ideal that the Bible portrays for us.
Uh, yeah, and oh goodness, I had a thought. Now I've lost it. Um, the here we are. We as humans are great at faking those things, right? So we can build up. You can say something like you just said, right? The New Testament doesn't have an idea of people, of a Christian that's not in a church or not a part of a group of believers. And so I think some people listening to our podcast go, "Phew, I'm attending church on Sunday regularly, therefore I have my fix and need for community."
Sure.
I think it requires a little bit more than that. It requires relational intentionality. It requires some vulnerability. It requires some trust of others, and it requires personal relationships. And not simply just deep relationships, but also pretty superficial relationships. Some of the best times I have in community with the guys at church are over fantasy baseball or over different sports that are going on. And
Sure.
so I do know, and I'm sure this happens to you a lot as well. People that you frankly don't know that well are coming up and asking really, really big questions. and asking you personally what your thoughts are, or how do you do this, and you're just like, maybe we could talk a little bit of sports first, or something like before we get to you know what I'm saying. And
Yeah,
so
I like to liken it to, and I won't name. I've got one or two specific people in mind that I won't name, but in my past, I've had uh, people who, I think part of this is because I'm a professor, but I get people who I barely know or are just getting to know me ask what I sort of jokingly refer to as like, that's more like a third or fourth date question for me. It's the like, let me dive deep into some like sort of personal or even like theological deep end where I'm like, you know, let's build a little bit more common ground here before before you pound me with these sort of deep pressing questions. So there is a sense in which I think that for most people, uh, you have to sort of build towards a depth of community, a depth of relational engagement. Most people are not wired for a sort of, oh, I just met you, now let's share our deepest fears and dreams and experiences and that kind of thing.
yeah, I can't do that. People do that to me, I just immediately begin to back away. I'm just like, no thanks.
But you do have people like that in your life where you have those levels of conversation.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, and some of this too depends on how you're wired, of course. I think people who tend to be more introverted and private, like both of us tend to be,
Yeah.
can take a little bit longer to get to those levels of sort of conversation and open sharing. But I think both of us would readily affirm we need those. We need to have those kinds of relationships in our lives. And I think that part of the difference is probably people like you and me don't feel like we need to have that with like 15 people.
Yeah. It's just just a handful, if that.
Yeah. So there are even sort of levels of community, right? I think that, both of us for years were in the same life group at church. We're no longer. It was
Yeah.
an amicable. It
Not
was
because of
multiplication.
not
It was
because of any
multiplication.
bitterness. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we multiplied out and went different directions. But I think obviously you and I have conversations where we would talk about things privately that we wouldn't even share necessarily in the context of that life group, which we were very close with. We had a terrific life group where we were pretty stable for a couple of years, 2, 3 years, and built some really good, strong relationships. But even in the context of that, we wouldn't always necessarily share the absolute depths of things that we might talk about between the two of us privately versus in the context of a group. Now part of that is there was the sort of the mixed gender dynamic of perhaps things that we'd want to talk about would be more awkward or just more challenging when you add that dynamic in, but still there, still
Oh
there.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Gotta have those relationships. Those are necessary.
So why do you think why do you think some people, and even we can speak to some degree from our own experience probably, but why do you think some people shrink back from being in that kind of community?
Yeah, I know for me, like I have a strong desire for privacy. And so sometimes my strong desire for privacy can override my understanding that I need community. And so I think that's a real thing, at least for me, and I assume for others as well. But I also think there's a piece where people can shrink for a community because they would say, if you saw the ugliness of who I am, you wouldn't want to actually know me. So
Sure.
I think that's part of it as well. And then I think there's probably another piece where I just want to be autonomous. I just want to do my own thing, and I don't want to be responsible to anybody else. So those are some things about why I think people shrink from community. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think those two dynamics are pretty fundamental. And I think that your second point is actually a piece that oftentimes is not considered, meaning I think when people tend to think about the idea of community, they think of it more as a consumer rather
Yeah.
than someone who actively gives in that context. There can be there can be the perception of either I don't want that or I don't need that. And rarely is there the thought of, well, maybe I'm called by scripture and by God to reach out to others and care for them, not just to receive care myself, but to care for others. So I think sometimes uh, people have a sort of consumer mentality when it comes to this idea of community of, well, I tried it, I didn't get anything out of it, or I didn't like it, or that person, the people that I was, connecting with weren't like me, and so I struggled with that, and so I didn't get much out of it, and so I'm checking out. I'm done.
Hmm.
Versus a sense of, well, I'm also called to actively pursue caring for others in terms of my responsibility as a Christian within the body of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that consumer mentality is I, I I think a pretty important phrase. That there are some relationships and there are some pieces of our community that should be consumer based, right? When you go to the grocery store, it should be a relationship that's consumer based, right? I like my grocer, but if I get a better price somewhere else, I'm going to go somewhere else. But I don't know that our relationships in the church should be that. They should be more committed. They should be more covenantal in that way.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to all elements of consumeristic life. Right there's a place for having a consumer mentality in certain contexts, to be sure. Um, I in terms of community, um, I think that one of the the things that sticks in my brain about this whole concept of community is this would have been during my days in Wheaton, working on my PhD. We were part of a church, really good, strong biblical church, and we were preaching through Hebrews. And our pastor preached through, I think we were in Hebrews 3 and 4, which is the story of, uh, it's really an exposition of Psalm 95, which is retelling Israel's experience of wandering in the wilderness and their disobedience there. And it's interesting. He entitled his sermon on that passage, "Help Me Get to Heaven."
Hmm.
And his point in that was simply that we need each other to persevere in the faith, that God uses relationships in our lives to help us continue to persevere in trusting in Jesus, even in the face of difficult circumstances and persecution and all that kind of stuff. So that expression has kind of stuck in my head of "help me get to heaven." Um, Obviously, Christ is the one who gets us there. His Spirit sustains us and does that. But God uses means. He
Yeah.
uses the means of the relationships we have with other people in our lives. And I think any Christian who's walked with Jesus for any period of time has had the experience of someone speaking a truth into their life at a key moment, and looking back and being able to say, that's exactly what I needed to hear. What that person said, even if they didn't realize how targeted and direct and on target it was, that's exactly what I needed to hear. That encouraging piece of scripture, that word of rebuke, whatever it might have been, that act of kindness that person may not even realize they've done, was exactly what I needed at that moment. And that's a function of being in community with people.
Hmm. Yes, and from my own personal experience, that's been beneficial to me when people have said that or have pushed me to do something. I can think of a particular time in a small group where I was encouraged to go for a job I had kind of settled in my own head that I wasn't going to go for, or to stop doing what I'm doing in this way in life. And so there's some of those things in community have been really, really good, even though people probably aren't thinking about those today. Uh, I'm thinking about them today. I can remember being a freshman in college and even having a senior guy who, I'm not sure he would remember this conversation. In fact, I've had this conversation with him. He doesn't remember us talking, but him going, a lot of people were really involved on campus, and I just kind of decided I was going to be part of a local church and be really involved there. And I went, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. As an 18-year-old,
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. And so that was impactful for me. And you just don't know where it's going to come from or how it's going to impact you. So,
yeah. So let's transition to thinking about, how do you think our current experience of quarantine, which has greatly limited our experience of community, and in this context, we're talking specifically about physical proximity. Obviously, people are trying to do things that at some level replicate that. I know both of us are in life groups that are meeting virtually through Zoom. But most of us, if we're following the social distancing protocols, have greatly limited or restricted our actual interaction with people in a sort of person-to-person, face-to-face, embodied experience. Of course, most significantly demonstrated by the fact that we're not gathering together as local congregations to worship. So how do you think this current context, let's say coming out of it, whenever that is, what sort of impact do you think our current experience will have on our future experience of community, our desire for it, things like that?
In relation to churches, right? That's kind of the
that's our focus. Yeah. Not so much in the broader public square.
Yeah, I do think there'll be a variety of responses, and I'm sure the dust will settle in one way or another. But I think there's going to be a certain segment that are like, boy, I really need to get back to, I didn't realize what I had in a worship service until it was gone. I didn't realize what that was doing for my spiritual life. I didn't realize what that was doing for my physical well-being to a certain extent. I didn't realize what it was doing for my mental stability to a certain extent. So I think there will be a segment that desires that, to be together with other believers, singing praises and listening to the word preached. And then I think there'll be another segment that goes, we can do this online. We can continue to do all of this online, and so say, boy, it's been really nice to be in our pajamas until 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and let's continue to do that. And I'm a little nervous about that crowd if I'm being honest. I also think the physical touching will go away in large church services, hopefully for a time, and that excites me very much.
Yeah, I know you're not disappointed about that. Neither of us are big huggers when it comes to that kind of interaction. So, but what do you think of this? I think this is a partial hot take, and I'm going to state it sharply, and then I'm going to back away from it. But don't you think that at some level, that's a bit of a dividing line between people who take their walk with Christ seriously versus those who have it as part of their life, but it's not really central to who they are and what they're about? Meaning that the people who are serious about walking with Jesus will long for and pursue those sorts of, return to kind of community in terms of being with other believers, while those who maybe are a little bit less serious and have it maybe as a cultural piece of their identity, or just sort of are not as committed to Christ, might tend to fall more into the category of, well, yeah, heck, I can just get my fix through some an internet message and maybe some worship songs on Spotify or something. Do you think that's too sharp of a statement?
Yeah, yes and no. I think I do think that people tend to, it has a tendency to be true. Like, I think that's generally true, but I think coming out of that movement, I think we will have people that really, really love Jesus, but will eventually move into long for and desire a person to person experience, kind of like what you're saying. And so I think one thing that I've been grateful for in some of those internet church movements is it does awaken a desire for people, but those people have a tendency to go, I really need to be in person with people and interact with people and move that way. And so it's been a way that the church has continued to grow. So I think it's a little bit of a hot take. Do you want to back off it now, or do you want to lean into it a little bit more?
I don't know. I'm tempted to double down. I'm going to channel my inner Skip Bayless here. But Lord have mercy, no. But I don't know. I just think that, and maybe this goes back to the earlier comment about consumerism. That to me feels like the ultimate experience of consumerism, because it's all what I get and none of what I am called to contribute in terms of what my role is in the body of Christ. It's just about me consuming. Oh, well, I'll go with a John Piper message this week. I'll go with a Lig Duncan one next week. Pick your favorite internet preacher or whatever. And maybe I'll, chime in on a message board or something. And now I've got community. Like, that's not biblical community. That's at best a shadow or a cheap substitute for the real thing when it comes to embodied existence, embodied experience of community where you're physically with someone. And look, we've experienced this in the education realm, right? It's so different when you're trying to teach online, where you can't physically see or easily read body language or facial expressions or things like that. Because when you can do that in person, you can often say, okay, I got to stop. And it's clear that people aren't necessarily tracking with me. Let me back up and let me try to re-explain that. Or even just, you can't fully replicate that in an online context. And I just think that there are elements of our existence as believers, fundamental elements of our existence as believers, that cannot be replicated through a virtual context, that at the minimum are leaving people who want to go that route very spiritually anemic or spiritually undernourished when it comes to their understanding of what it means to walk with Jesus.
Yeah, and I think we mostly agree. I do. I do think that those internet churchgoers, the people that do get saved through that, or the people that do have a spiritual renewal through that, will find their way to a congregation. I think that's innate in the person, that they're going to desire that.
Yes, and again, obviously there are extenuating circumstances, right? Maybe they're in a place where there's not a good, faithful local congregation,
Sure.
or something like that. But again, so I think oftentimes in these conversations, those exceptions are charted out. Well, what about? And I was like, okay, but doesn't the exception prove the rule?
Yeah, for the general population.
Yeah,
I think they probably need to be in a church, in a physical gathering.
yes, absolutely. So anyway, we should probably move on to our athlete here.
Yeah.
For episode 15. You want to walk through our options here?
Yeah. So people who've worn the number 15, a recent person, Patrick Mahomes wears 15.
Yep.
Dad was a New York Met. Big fan.
Okay.
Bart Starr won the first 2 Super Bowls with the Green Bay Packers.
Yes.
Was the player in the Ice Bowl, I believe, against the Cowboys.
Yep. Sort of an iconic presence in the early NFL years. Yep.
Yeah. Carmelo Anthony, the Denver Nugget, New York Knick, Atlanta Hawk for a day.
Now, in New York, did he wear 15? Because I know he did it in Denver.
That's a good question. I'm not totally certain. I always struggle to watch Carmelo. It's just like the ball would get to him and it would just die. And
yeah, in fact, you'll appreciate this. Most of our listeners probably won't because they don't know Greek, but uh, my memory trick for remembering, there's a Greek verb. There's the verb mello, which means I am about to. And
Hmm.
so for my sports inclined Greek students, I say your memory trick for remembering that is Mello was always about to shoot the ball. So again, there's your little Greek tidbit for the episode. But
Yeah, the only time I saw Carmelo play live in person was I went to Madison Square Garden at kind of the height of Linsanity.
okay.
Um, and when Linsanity was at its best is when Carmelo was injured and the ball moved, right?
Yeah.
But when Carmelo was on the floor, the ball didn't move and the ball just kind of stopped. Now in the game I was at, I think they shot just a million threes, right? I think J.R. Smith had 7 or 8, Steve Novak had 7 or 8, Carmelo had 6 or 7, and
Sure.
Jeremy Lin had like 6 points, and
Yeah.
that was a game. So anyway, Carmelo, Vince Carter,
Yeah.
who, goodness, I think he played
Which
in
he was the original. He was Vinsanity, from which
Vinsanity.
Linsanity eventually sort
Yeah,
of took its name from. But
he played in. I think I read recently the '90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and now the 2020s. Played in 4 decades of different decades,
yeah,
which is fantastic.
and if the NBA doesn't restart, I mean he is retiring this year, so he may have played his last game.
In
But
Madison Square Garden. Yeah.
what's remarkable about him is not just his longevity, but in the mid '90s when he came into the league, he was an athletic freak. Um, and his other nickname was Half Man, Half Amazing. And he was just he has some epic, if you're interested, if you like slam dunk competitions, if you YouTube some of his performances in the slam dunk competitions, it's epic stuff. But when he lost his athleticism to the level of being elite, he rebranded his game and became a deadly 3-point shooter, which enabled him to stick around in the league for many years, well past the time where he could explode past people consistently and finish at the rim.
And I remember one Olympics I was watching. It was pretty early in maybe 2000 where he jumped over I believe a 7-foot German
Yeah.
and dunked over him like in game, and it was just, oh my goodness.
He was
If
freakishly athletic. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun, and of course our homage to Ohio State. Do you want to drop the athlete?
Yeah, that would be the Ohio State University. And I think the obvious representative for Ohio State is Ezekiel Elliott. He wore number 15 at Ohio State, and was discussing the other day with one of my boys whether he or Eddie George was the best Ohio State running back I've seen in my lifetime. I think
Hmm.
there's a bit of a, flip the coin on that. Even though Eddie George won the Heisman Trophy, Ezekiel Elliott was unbelievable. So, who are we going to go with here in terms of our athlete? You got a preference?
Well, I would like to remove Carmelo Anthony first and foremost.
Agreed.
I don't think either of us were alive for Bart Starr in the NFL, so maybe we could remove him as well.
Agreed.
Patrick Mahomes feels too new.
Agreed.
So that leaves us with, and Ezekiel Elliott doesn't wear 15 in the pros.
Yes, that's correct.
So we can have a conversation with him in 6 or 7 episodes. So that leaves us with, which I'm cool with.
Yeah, I'm good with going with Vince Carter as well. I think he is a remarkable athlete. And so I think for the number 15, he's an excellent choice here. All right. One thing you liked this week.
Yeah. So Andrea and I have been rewatching the series Lost on Hulu. They have all the seasons and everything. And when it was originally being watched, we would get a group of people together every week to watch it. in the dorm when I was in college, and it was great. I bowed out in probably season 4 or 5, so I'm coming up on the middle of season 3 right now. So excited to see how the story ends.
Gotcha. Yeah. Lost is probably either my favorite or second favorite television series in terms of drama of all time.
Yeah.
It's something I've watched through probably 3 or 4 times now, and every time through you see different layers and things like that. So
J.J. Abrams is quite good. If you've ever seen his TED Talk, it describes all of his movies, where there's just like this mystery that you don't really understand. However, I think J.J. Abrams at times can start a mystery not knowing what the conclusion is.
It's very clear that he did that in some ways with Lost. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I've heard about the ending. So I'm a little skeptical, and he did that. I think he did that with Star Wars too, and I think that's why it kind of flopped the way it did.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's your one thing this week?
Yeah, for me, it's the Easter feast that my wife prepared for us this past weekend. So we had a big spiral ham. We had cheesy potato casserole, cream spinach, green beans with bacon, and then a delightful berry cobbler as the dessert. So props to my lovely bride for feeding us so well in the midst of a Easter pandemic here. So,
and you love your cream spinach, don't you? Isn't that your like?
I do. I do not like spinach, but when you surround it in cheesy, creamy goodness, you have my attention. So,
okay, all right,
yeah. So, in any case, I believe that we have managed to wander through our various and sundry topics. I think that yet again we can mark this as mission accomplished for the week. Would you agree?
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. So I guess that just leaves us with one more thing to say. The Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.